Rational Wellness Podcasters. Dr. Ben Weitz here. I'm so glad you could join me today for another episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. Each week, I'll be bringing you the latest cutting-edge information on health and nutrition. In this media-driven world, it's easy to be confused about what's true and what's not. I'll cut through the conflicting headlines to bring you clarity, to help you optimize your health and maximize your life. Please subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. None of the information in this podcast is intended to diagnose any condition, and this podcast is not intended to substitute for going to see your medical doctor and getting sound medical advice. So let's get started on your path to better health. Hey, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Thanks for joining me again today. And we've got a great podcast on circadian rhythm today with Dr. Schuler. The circadian rhythm is the body's internal time clock, and it regulates our 24-hour cycle of metabolic processes. It's absolutely crucial for the proper timing of our body and our health. Our circadian rhythm helps to control the timing of our sleep, alertness, body temperature, hormones, and even our gene expression. People with circadian rhythm disorders have trouble or are unable to go to sleep or wake up at the times required for work or school. Our circadian rhythm is influenced by the light and dark cycle and exposure to artificial light, especially blue light from our phones and computer screens, among other factors, are known to disrupt our circadian rhythms. Alterations of our circadian rhythms are linked with increasing rates of diabetes, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and even cancer, which are increasingly epidemic problems in the U.S. and account for much of the high costs of healthcare here. Disruptions of our body's internal clock are increasingly common in modern U.S. society, where increasing number of people feel driven to work longer and longer hours, fueled by multiple stops at Starbucks for caffeine to allow us to stay awake. And this disrupts our natural circadian rhythm. In fact, over 68% of Americans consume caffeine after 6 p.m. on a regular basis. We're becoming a society that never sleeps. So it's no wonder that we are seeing record numbers of people with obesity, diabetes, and cancer, which is why I've asked Dr. Schuler to join me today to help sort out some of this information and to discuss some of the functional medicine solutions to these problems. Dr. Schuler is a doctor of chiropractic, a certified nutrition specialist, a registered nurse, a licensed nutritionist, and he's earned a Master of Science degree in human nutrition. Dr. Schuler serves as the Director of Clinical Affairs for Integrative Therapeutics, and he's an adjunct assistant professor at the School of Health Sciences and Education at New York Chiropractic College. He practices integrative and functional medicine in the greater Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota area. Dr. Schuler is also a frequent contributor to scientific conferences and texts, and he recently contributed a chapter on light and dark cycles to the textbook Integrative and Functional Medical Nutrition Therapy, Principles and Practices. Corey, thank you for joining me on my Rational Wellness Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That's great. So the first question, which really doesn't pertain to our topic, I just had to ask you as a result of seeing your Facebook picture. And I have to preface this by saying, now I'm a city boy. I grew up in New York. I live in Los Angeles. What is that animal in your Facebook picture with you?
Well, I mean, it's the shape of a dog, but it's sized slightly differently. That's my little boy. That's my Min Pin Lincoln, and his sister's not in the picture, but I think he is trying to clean my brain via my nasal cavity, actually, in that picture. So that's Lincoln.
Okay, great. So the first question is, I'd like to try to get a little clarification after reading that draft of that book chapter you wrote about the circadian rhythm with Dr. Hope. So I wanted to kind of simplify it a little bit and in a couple of sentences, see if I can sort of get a sense of the main concept that you're explaining there, which is there's a central time clock located in the brain in the suprachiasmatic nucleus within the hypothalamus, and there are peripheral clocks located in nearly every cell in the body. The central clock, which is governed by light cues via the retina, helps coordinate these peripheral clocks. The peripheral clocks are largely governed by, among other things, nutrient timing and composition. Is that sort of the basic setup?
That's the basic setup, yeah. Even in basic terms, that sounds complicated now that I hear you say it.
Yeah, I know it does. So, can you explain how the modern lifestyle negatively affects our natural circadian rhythm?
It wreaks havoc on it. I mean, so some of the things to know, and I use the term Zeitgeber, nice German word that means time giver, because both the central and the peripheral circadian clocks really are influenced by the environment. And that makes sense, right? If we were made to live on this planet, we should be, and we're not nocturnal. We need to be awake during the day and recover and sleep at night. And so that's sort of the deal. We rely on these environmental cues. So you mentioned light, food is another really significant environmental factor. But what we take a look at your current lifestyle. I mean, I'm, as a graduate student, waking up super early in the morning to get some work done before the sun comes up, and then going to work all day. And then, there's something good on TV. So I'm going to watch TV for a little bit, take a little bit of a break, spend time with family. And then I haven't finished my projects for the night, or I need to catch up on charting or whatever. So I'm up late at night. And thank you, Thomas Edison, electricity and our infrastructure, and, thank you, Wi-Fi and the internet, because it allows us to do stuff like this, but it also allows us to do it at incredible times. Just yesterday, I had a meeting with Japan. Well, one of us had to decide who's not going to sleep, and it wasn't them. It was me. And so what does that mean? It means that we have the technology, but our biology hasn't necessarily caught up with that. And so we get unentrained. We sort of fall into whatever rhythm we think is necessary, and we call it a variety of things. Actually, it depends on who you are, but we're talking about artificially changing your circadian rhythm by light, dark type of cycles that aren't natural.
So, how much of a role does caffeine, our caffeine obsession, and sleeping as little as possible is almost seen as a badge of success in our society? How big an impact does that play?
Huge. And I think it's shifted a little bit. I think we saw the height of I don't sleep at all, I'll sleep when I die kind of mentality. Probably, there was and I'm not a sociologist or anthropologist, but mid 80s to mid 90s, that was really peaking. I think that we're maybe balancing that societally a little bit and saying, sleep is important, sleep is awesome. I sleep 9 hours a night, and hopefully some people are wearing that as a badge of honor. But the number of hours or how well you sleep doesn't change how much productive or how productive you think you can be. So that productivity badge of honor still remains, and so it does keep people shortening their schedules, finding extra time to do other things, and being abrupt in their changes of sleep schedules. And so what that means is, sometimes I wake up at 5, and that's when I'm good and productive, but then I do that for 5 or 6 days in a row, and I'm just too tired. I can't wake up at 5 anymore, and so now I sleep until 8, and so now I have this huge shift in my waking time, which changes my pattern, which is actually we know this now, is a huge activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or our stress response. Now a messed up circadian rhythm and a stress response. We're trying to deal with both at the same time, and we use kind of the similar resources to recover. So it gets really complicated really fast. So your original explanation, which I was like, I should have made that a lot easier. It's worthwhile to be that complex, because there's a lot of moving parts to just waking up and going to sleep.
Interesting. So it's important to try to wake up and go to sleep at the same time every day. That's super important.
Yeah, that's what's referred to as the avoiding abrupt shifts in waking and
Okay.
avoiding abrupt shifts. It's not the problem going to sleep. It's the abrupt shifts of waking up. So if you need to, shorten your day, it's almost always better to shorten it at night and changing your going to bed time rather than changing your waking time. Your waking time should be relatively sacred. So I think of like the teenager, like, waking up and going to school all at the same time every day of the week, and then a weekday, and then sleeping until noon or 1 o'clock on Saturday. That's really hard on the body.
Do I know it? I have an 18-year-old at home, and he's a musician, so he's really got that to the extreme. So how does stress and adrenal function impact our circadian rhythm?
Oh, well, so the HPA axis, or the stress response system, essentially comes to the rescue of a circadian rhythm gone bad. So I think it's best to just use examples instead of sort of using the terms that I'm more familiar with. We'll use an example. Let's say that you're waking up and you're not a morning person, right? In circadian rhythm medicine, we talk about early risers or early birds or morning larks. And night owls. So you sort of classify people into, do you prefer to wake up in the morning and you're more active in the morning, or do you get that second wind at night and you're active at night, or are you neither? If you're generally a night owl, but forcing you into a early morning waking period can really artificially limit your sleeping hours, right? Because you feel good energy at midnight, but now you got to be up at 6. You're only going to get 6 hours, and that might not be enough for you. So what happens is you have to be able to get through the day. Let's say you're going to school, going to work. So what happens is the HPA axis activates, it secretes different gonadotropins, but essentially the pituitary launches the signal of ACTH. ACTH lands on the adrenal cortex. The adrenal cortex secretes cortisol and a few other factors. And then the sort of the faster moving parts stimulate the adrenal medulla to stimulate epinephrine, norepinephrine, those more adrenal or adrenaline type neurotransmitter type things, just to get you going through the day. So then now what happens? If you have those things spiking, cortisol is up, norepinephrine, epinephrine is elevated. Now your blood sugar gets dysregulated because you have a lot of blood sugar floating so that you can, flee or fight in that sympathetic dominant state. And so because you're ready for action, well, now your pancreas senses that you have a lot of blood sugar in the bloodstream, and it secretes a bunch of insulin. And so now you have low blood sugar because of inappropriately high insulin. And so you wake up early when you're not supposed to, and then you go through the day and you're getting pumped up. You finally wake up and get going for the day, only to your body to be like, wait a second, this isn't right. And now you get slammed down. And so by 10 a.m., you're like, oh, and then what do you say to yourself? Oh, I didn't get enough sleep. Well, that's true, but it's only like a smidgen of the whole story because it's all those other things that happen too. So HPA to the rescue, and it can only do so much.
Interesting. Is thyroid another one of those organs that helps come to the rescue when you have these disruptions? I personally have noticed in some of my patients who are sleeping very little that they get elevations of their thyroid stimulating hormone for no other reason.
Yeah, so again, that would be instead of being the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, we consider the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis because the thyroid receives signals from the pituitary as well. And so once the HPA or HPT or HPG axis is activated, all of those signals cascade. It's like a waterfall. You can't really stop them. And so you would get a significant amount of TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, come up. And so, and that's an interesting thing. Actually, the thyroid piece of all of this is probably the least studied because we're still in the phase of researching and understanding, looking at, like you mentioned, the central clock and the circadian clock, and looking at kind of which genes encode for what. And then we're also looking kind of way out there as far as what does it do globally, as far as like swing shift workers and people who work the night shift and people who have chronic jet lag, and how their bodies are different. But we haven't like sort of narrowed down the research into that. If you don't sleep well and you have to have your TSH run in the morning, it'll be abnormally elevated. but we haven't done a lot of great, controlled evidence to support that statement, but totally makes sense.
Interesting. So in that book chapter you wrote, you talked about how eating a meal within a short period of time after eating is important for helping to establish a circadian rhythm. And you also discussed the fact that there's some literature that supports eating earlier with lower serum lipid levels. Can you explain what would be the evolutionary advantage for this?
So I think that the term breakfast actually means a whole lot more now that we understand it in terms of circadian rhythm from an evolutionary. So eating within 30 to 40 minutes of waking is probably ideal, what it looks like from that circadian rhythm research, and restricting our time feeding to anywhere between 8 and 12 hours. And what I think is going on, it's total speculation, but I think it's in line with the science, is that if you're asleep in the cave all night for 12 hours and you have to go and you have to hunt, gather to survive for that day, you need energy to do that. And so it's good to have something on hand to consume right away in the morning so you have the energy to go do that, because you probably don't have the fat reserves to live off. You have to, use the energy that you're consuming that day. So I would imagine waking up and eating is helpful for that, as well as if you ate a big meal and then went right to bed, which a lot of us are guilty of doing now in modern society. What happens after you eat a big meal during the day? You get groggy, you're not as alert, you're not as attentive. Well, if you eat a big meal and fall asleep in the cave and you have this deeper sleep and you're groggy and you're not quick to move and you happen to be the target of a predator, you're not going to be able to fight back as easily. And it makes a lot of sense given the fact that our bodies don't have the redundancy you can't do both. You can't rest and restore and repair and fight at the same time. So there's a challenge of maybe it not being a great idea to eat at night.
Interesting.
For that.
Okay. So there's been a recent trend in functional medicine to advocate something known as intermittent fasting, and there's some research to show that it promotes longevity. And the concept is that you don't eat for a period of time like 12 to 14 hours. So, some of the research shows people don't eat for an entire day or a couple of days, but probably the least stressful way to do it is you don't eat for this period of time. And an easy way to do it is you have your last meal of the day at, say, 5, 6 o'clock, and then you skip breakfast and you don't eat till, say, like 8 or 10 in the morning. But that means that you're really skipping breakfast. So even though this may have some benefits, it sounds like this might be a bad strategy if we're taking into account our circadian rhythm.
Yeah, I'm actually circadian rhythm research is actually consistent with intermittent fasting. It's just inconsistent with skipping breakfast. So It means that eating breakfast early in the morning is a good idea, and time-restricted feeding of an 8 to 12-hour window has metabolic advantages to it from a gene expression perspective to a blood sugar handling perspective. So it seems like intermittent fasting just went the wrong direction. And I see that it sort of got popularized probably within the fitness community as saying, intermittent fasting is good. It's easiest to skip breakfast. We all like our social interactions at supper, or our last meal of the day. So let's make sure that we get that meal in, but breakfast we can forego. So that's where I think that started. I just think we went wrong. And actually there is literature, there's a new piece of literature out that shows men have negative neuroendocrine effects if they intermittent fast by skipping breakfast. And we would think that if that study was recreated, we probably wouldn't have the same neuroendocrine problems. By neuroendocrine problems, I mean like sex hormones, like lower testosterone and those sorts of things, which would then apply to gains in the gym, vitality, stamina, energy for men of virtually all ages. So my position of it is intermittent fasting is good, just don't skip breakfast. Your window should instead be like I don't know, I kind of tease and say like our snowbirds. I'm from Minnesota, right? So
Right.
we have people who spend the winter in Florida, and they wake up super early, or not really early, but they wake up in the morning. They eat their eggs and bacon and coffee because it's a high fat, protein rich diet or breakfast, and then they probably eat supper by 4 o'clock. That's not wrong. That actually works for both intermittent fasting and circadian support. So I'm with you. I'm with everybody on that. And the third wrinkle in this, because I study small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So just to make this one more layer complicated, I am not a fan of frequent eating. I like to space out our meals about every 4 hours. So I'm a 3 square meal a day kind of fella, 12-hour window of eating. And I think that seems to, and make sure you're eating breakfast. And then that hits all of my 3 buttons. So that's the way I recommend it.
Yeah, interesting. I recently interviewed Dr. Pimentel, and yeah, he's a big fan of that because that helps reset the migrating motor complex, which helps the small intestine to clear out bacteria.
Yep, absolutely.
So can you explain how abnormal circadian rhythms increase our risk for cancer and result in a poorer cancer prognosis?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because there's probably a lot of variables to it. The first article I read about this was in 2005. A researcher by the name of Rusk was really interested, and he was following up on some of the melatonin for cancer research, and where they were trying to dose melatonin, trying to figure out what's going on. And he found a huge increase in risk for breast cancer for individuals who had night shifts or swing shift working. And so that's been teased out, but really in pieces. We know that we're changing some of the genes that code for apoptosis or programmed cell death. We change some of the blood sugar regulation genes, or the expression thereof of those genes. And so that's contributory to cancer risk. And as far as prognosis goes, it sort of fits into the same pattern. Individuals who have run into that have run into the same challenges of improper gene coding. However, it gets a lot easier than that too. You say gene encoding, sometimes people get lost. From a simplest perspective, if you have an abnormal circadian rhythm, you're not secreting melatonin. So let's go back to the kind of the basics and a little bit more Newtonian understanding of this, is that melatonin is what we refer to as a suicidal antioxidant. And so what that means is, unlike vitamin C, E, CoQ10, which it can like quench a free radical, and then it can go back, it can get recycled, and then it can go quench another one and keep doing that over and over and over again. But melatonin molecule doesn't do that. It comes in, this pineal gland secretes it, it circulates for a very short period of time, generally about 50 minutes or so for half-life, and it quenches a free radical, and it's completely destroyed. And so the only way to use melatonin as a free radical, or as a and so if you have an oxidative stress issue, and we'll put cancer in that territory because it's a huge oxidative stress. A solid tumor, for example, creates a lot of oxidative stress. Your body's secreting melatonin at all hours of the day. And then by the time it gets to night, you're not needed for your sleep. And when you don't sleep, you don't restore your body. A lot of done just for the day that occurs through natural aging doesn't get repaired. And that solid tumor, if it decides or is able to metastasize, can attack those other damaged tissues. So it's a very feed forward and scary. Even as I say it, it's a scary situation. So sleep ain't nothing to sneeze about. This is a really serious issue. And as you mentioned in your introduction, it's taken whole society down with it if it's not appropriately respected.
Interesting. You know, I've noticed, and I've seen some of the literature as well, that taking a high dose of melatonin, 20 milligrams at night before bed, actually has a potent anti-cancer effect. And that plays right into exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, we could probably do a whole talk on just on melatonin. That Paolo Lasani out of Italy did a lot of the early work on pineal gland products, including melatonin. And by products, I mean secreted by that gland. and they worked their way. They started out at about 50 milligrams. They went down to 10, they tried 20, and a couple of studies, they went as high as 300 milligrams.
Wow.
And it sort of landed, the solid tumor community landed around the 20 milligram mark. But what's interesting is that the body doesn't make that much melatonin usually per day. So you and I, we're healthy. We're probably only making 0.3 to 0.9 milligrams of melatonin per day, tiny amounts. And so even the normal melatonin that's on the shelf at 3 milligrams is really 10x what you make by the body. So I know melatonin sort of is seen as a get to sleep hormone or a get to sleep dietary supplement, but really it's just shifting that circadian pattern back a bit. So it's great for things like jet lag or circadian rhythms that have already shifted.
Right. Yeah. I like to use except for cancer patients, I like to use melatonin intermittently, not have people just rely on it for a long period of time. I rather find some herbs or something like that if they need something on a regular basis.
Yeah. There's actually, so that thought, because I think that you're leading to a process, and I want to maybe dispel this to the extent that we know it, is that oftentimes when we take in a hormone or a pro-hormone, we're concerned that we're actually suppressing hormone production of that specific one. But that's not necessarily the case. Actually, it's probably for sure not the case with melatonin, like thyroid hormone, right? Thyroid, if you take in a thyroid pill and there's thyroid in it, then your thyroid itself, the organ, makes less thyroid hormone. But melatonin doesn't have that same feedback mechanism. We've actually shown studies that have given, we've done baseline testing. I say we, researchers have done baseline testing of individuals, given them fairly large boluses of melatonin, and then taken it away and actually shown that the body restores that production of melatonin. So I wouldn't be as concerned about the cycling. I do like the cycling of melatonin and the fact that it sort of gives you a pause to say, wait, am I really addressing my sleep hygiene? Am I doing all the other things from a lifestyle perspective that I should do for my sleep and circadian rhythm? So I like it for that reason, but not for the reason of my body's not making melatonin. So I just like to clarify that one.
Awesome. Thanks for that clarification, Dr. Schuler. What role, there's been a ton of research on the microbiota. That's the healthy bacteria in your colon and in other parts of the body, which is so crucial for our health. What role does microbiota play in the circadian rhythm? And can we take steps to positively influence this to improve our circadian rhythm?
Yeah, I think to some degree we can try. While the microbiota, as you mentioned, is really getting a lot of attention, sometimes we don't have all the details of it. It's a fairly immature science, and it's not always clinically actionable. But there are some things that we do know, and kind of how the microbiome is affected by the circadian rhythm. It has its own circadian rhythm. Like our gut, it has its own way of doing things. And so you think about all the microbiota, every microbe there has its own not just life cycle, but its own daily diurnal cycle. And so when you so you're going to have times of activity in your body that are going to be higher every day, and times that are less active. And so what we're finding is that if you're eating at improper times, or maybe eating things that your environment that you've created in there is not, or exposed to, if that's not consistent with the foods you're eating, that could be one of the reasons that we're not handling food, or we have such diversity of types of foods we want. So let's make this practical. Some people tolerate a ketogenic diet really, really well, right? High fat, moderate protein, very low carbohydrate for extended periods of time, and they do awesome with it. I love the ketogenic diet. Some people do a lot better with a Mediterranean style diet with lots of fruits and vegetables, some fatty fish, lean meats to some degree, and they thrive on that. And some people do really well on vegetarian, vegan, or even pescatarian style eating, which is essentially in direct opposition to the ketogenic diet. All three of these dietary styles have been shown to be effective for one reason or another, either clinical research, or just from our N=1 experiments that all of us hackers are doing. So the challenge is what's the best for us? The key to it is probably our own microbiome, and how that the diversity or non-diversity of that is different, because we know that if we change our macronutrients significantly, we can make major shifts in the microbiota, because they have to essentially adapt or die. And so in order to live, they diversify in different ways, and certain colonies grow and others don't, etc. And so my guess is that whichever rhythm, whichever style of eating sort of fits you best is probably a good indicator of what that microbiota looks like. And luckily, I mean, it's cool to live in this time and technology era where you can note that. And I think that there will be more studies coming out of, American Gut and Ubiome, and they're going to start harvesting this data and really show what kind of results that we're guessing at right now. But we are kind of guessing.
So that was a great discussion, Dr. Schuler. I really appreciate you presenting some interesting information about circadian rhythms and the part they play in our health, and the things that we can do to improve our circadian rhythms and help us prevent chronic diseases and maximize our health. For listeners and practitioners who'd like to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Well, you can always go to my website. My website is metabolictreatmentcenter.com, or you can catch me on Facebook. I think Facebook's been a really cool advent. And so you can just search my name, Corey Schuler, reach me on my fan page there. There's 100,000 or so people that listen to the craziness that I put up on a routine basis. So that's a good place to interact with me as well.
That's great. And you mentioned this textbook. When is textbook going to be out, and what is that called, so we can look out for it?
Yeah, it's Integrative and Functional Medical Nutrition Therapy Principles and Practice. And it's a textbook with a lot of different cool authors and really some cutting edge material for medical students and as well as nutrition students. Some people that aren't in the medical field may be interested in it as well, but it's a pretty dense text. Anyway, I think it's going to be great. It's published by Springer Science and will be out hopefully this fall.
That's great. I understand you're going to be out in the Los Angeles area in October, so maybe while you're out here, we could grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and do something to disrupt our circadian rhythms.
That sounds good. I think I'll be there in June, too. I'll be there in June for a meeting, and October.
So you're going to the
of disruption that could happen.
There you go. You going to the IFM annual meeting in June? Yeah, maybe I'll look for you there. Okay.
Yeah.
Talk to you soon, Corey. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay, bye.